My childhood memories are mostly happy ones, at least until I turned 12. That's when everything changed. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. My dad was packing his bags, while Mom was crying in their bedroom. I stood in the doorway of my room, confused and scared, watching him walk down the stairs with 2 large suitcases. No explanation, no goodbye hug, nothing. Just the sound of the door closing and his car starting up in the driveway. I ran to the window and watched his silver Honda disappear down our street, thinking he'd turn around at any moment. But he didn't. I found Mom in the kitchen later that day, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Why did Dad leave?" I asked, hoping she could help me make sense of it all. She slammed her coffee mug down so hard I jumped. "Because he's a selfish, terrible person, Sheila. He abandoned his own child and he won't even pay child support. That's the kind of man your father is." I didn't understand what child support meant back then, but the bitterness in Mom's voice scared me. I'd never seen her like this before. When I tried to ask more questions, she cut me off sharply. "Just forget about him. He doesn't deserve our tears." At first, I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. I'd lie awake at night, wondering if I'd done something wrong, if somehow this was my fault. I kept expecting him to call or show up at my school, but he never did. As weeks turned into months, the pain started to dull. Mom was right, he was a traitor who'd abandoned us. I threw myself into school and my hobbies, trying to be the perfect daughter for Mom. She seemed so broken after Dad left, and I wanted to make her happy. We developed new routines, just the 2 of us. We'd have pizza and movie nights on Fridays, and sometimes she'd let me help her in the garden on weekends. Things were different, but we were managing. Then, about 2 years after Dad left, Mom started dating again. That's when Steve entered our lives. He seemed nice enough at first, bringing Mom flowers, taking us both out to dinner, asking about my school. But looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs. "Your mom tells me you've been staying out late with your friends," he said one evening, about 3 months into their relationship. His tone was casual, but there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. "Just until 6, I said. Mom said it was okay." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, things are going to be a little different around here from now on. A 14-year-old girl needs structure." I remember looking at Mom, expecting her to say something, to stand up for me. But she just smiled adoringly at Steve and squeezed his hand. That's when I first felt it, that slight shift in the ground beneath my feet, like everything I knew was about to change again. My entire life changed after Mom and Steve got married. First, it was a strict curfew. I had to be home by 5 p.m. sharp, no exceptions. Then came the chore chart, detailing every single task I needed to complete each day. If I missed even one item, Steve would ground me. "But I have volleyball practice after school on Thursdays," I protested when he demanded I clean the entire kitchen by 6 p.m. every day. "Then you'll have to quit volleyball," Steve said flatly. "Your responsibilities at home come first." I looked to Mom for support, but she just nodded along. "Steve's right, honey. We need to teach you discipline, or you'll end up like your father." That became her go-to phrase whenever I complained, "or you'll end up like your father." It stung every time, making me feel guilty for even questioning Steve's rules. The rules kept piling up. I wasn't allowed to use my phone after 8 p.m. My homework had to be done at the kitchen table, where Steve could monitor me. I needed permission to hang out with friends, which was rarely granted. Even my clothes became an issue. Steve insisted on approving my outfits before I left for school. One day, I came home 10 minutes late because my biology teacher wanted to discuss my project after class. Steve was waiting at the door, his face red with anger. "Where were you?" he demanded. "Mr. Peterson needed to talk about." "No excuses," he cut me off. "You're grounded for 2 weeks. Hand over your phone." "But that's not fair," I protested. "I was talking to a teacher." 3 weeks now," he said, holding out his hand. "Want to make it 4? Mom watched this whole exchange from the kitchen doorway, saying nothing. Later, when I tried to explain to her what happened, she just sighed. Steve is trying to teach you responsibility, Sheila. Something your father never did. Things got even more complicated when Mom announced she was pregnant. She was beaming with joy, and Steve couldn't stop grinning. I tried to be happy for them, but something in my gut told me things were about to get worse. My half-brother Tommy was born when I was 15 and a half. He was cute, I'll give him that, but his arrival turned my life upside down. Suddenly, I wasn't just responsible for my usual chores, I became an unpaid babysitter. You need to watch Tommy while we go out, Mom would say, already putting on her coat. But I have a history test tomorrow. Family comes first, Steve would interrupt. Besides, we're supporting you since your father doesn't send any money. The least you can do is help out. I watched them go on their dinner dates while I sat home with Tommy, trying to study with a crying baby. Steve bought Tommy designer clothes and expensive toys, while I was told we couldn't afford new school supplies. When Tommy cried at night, I was the one who had to get up and check on him, even on school nights. He's your brother, Mom would say when I complained about being exhausted. And since your father doesn't pay alimony, you need to contribute to this household somehow. By the time I turned 16, I was sick of hearing about how much of a financial burden I was. Every time Steve or Mom opened their mouths, it was about how much they had to spend on me. So I decided to do something about it. There was this small cafe near our house, the Morning Brew, that was always looking for help. I walked in one afternoon after school and talked to the manager, Sarah. She must have seen something in my eyes, because she hired me on the spot. The pay wasn't great, minimum wage, plus whatever tips I could get, but it was something. I worked from 4 to 8 p.m. on weekdays and longer shifts on weekends. The next 2 years were brutal. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. to take care of Tommy, go to school, work at the cafe, come home to more chores and Tommy duty, then try to squeeze in homework somewhere between everything else. My grades started slipping, there just weren't enough hours in the day. When graduation came around, I was devastated to learn I didn't have enough points for a scholarship. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, acceptance letter in hand, trying to explain to Mom and Steve about the tuition costs. Maybe we could figure something out together? I suggested hopefully. I could work more hours, and if you could help with just part of it. Steve laughed. Actually laughed. You should have thought about that before letting your grades drop. We don't have money for your college, Mom added, bouncing Tommy on her knee. If you'd studied harder instead of hanging out with your work friends all the time. I ended up taking an entry-level position at Wilson Trading Company. The hours were long, the work was mind-numbing, and my supervisor, Mr. Peters, seemed to take pleasure in pointing out every tiny mistake I made. But it was a real job with a real paycheck. Then came the bombshell. After my third paycheck, Steve called a family meeting. Now that you're working full-time, he said, it's time you started paying rent. I stared at him in disbelief. But I already give Mom money for groceries. That's for food, Mom jumped in. This would be for your room, utilities, everything else. They had it all calculated, a number that would eat up almost half my monthly salary. I wanted to argue, to point out how unfair it was, but what choice did I have? My salary wouldn't cover rent anywhere else in town, not with food and other expenses. The next 2 years felt like being trapped in quicksand. Every month, I handed over a chunk of my salary, watching Steve and Mom spend money on Tommy's private swimming lessons and expensive toys, while I wore the same clothes I'd had since high school. But I kept my head down and worked hard. Mr. Peters eventually noticed, and when a supervisor position opened up, he recommended me for it. The raise that came with the promotion wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough to finally get out. I found a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't much, the paint was peeling and the neighbors were loud, but it was mine. The day I moved out, Mom barely looked up from helping Tommy with his homework. Make sure you leave your key, was all she said. Living on my own wasn't easy. The apartment was small and needed repairs I couldn't afford, but at least it was mine. I kept working at Wilson Trading, taking every overtime shift I could get. Still, after rent, utilities, and basic necessities, there was barely anything left to save. I'd watch my coworkers with college degrees moving up the corporate ladder while I stayed stuck in the same position. My boss had even told me directly, "Sheila, you're one of our best workers, but without a degree, there's only so far you can go here." College remained this distant dream. I'd sometimes browse university websites during my lunch break, calculating tuition costs and always coming up short. Every scholarship I found required either better high school grades than I had or full-time student status, which I couldn't afford. Mom and Steve rarely called. When they did, it was usually Mom asking if I was coming to Tommy's school events or soccer games. I usually made up excuses. I couldn't bear watching Steve beam with pride while my mother fawned over her perfect son. Then came that night, just after my 22nd birthday. I was heating up leftover Chinese food when someone knocked on my door. When I looked through the peephole, my heart stopped. There he was, my father, looking 10 years older than he should. "Sheila?" His voice was exactly as I remembered it. "Please, can we talk?" My first instinct was to slam the door in his face. How dare he show up after 10 years? But something in his appearance made me pause. He looked sick, almost frail. "5 minutes," I said, keeping the door chain on. "That's all I ask," he replied, and something in his voice made me remove the chain. He sat at my small kitchen table, his hands shaking slightly as he declined my automatic offer of coffee. Up close, he looked even worse, pale and thin, nothing like the strong, confident man from my childhood memories. "I need to tell you why I left," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not your biological father." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down hard in the chair opposite him. "What?" "I had suspicions," he continued, his voice steady now. "Your mother had been acting strange, protective of her phone. I found messages. I did a DNA test. When I confronted her, she confessed to having an affair." My head was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "She begged me to forgive her," he went on. "But I couldn't stay. Every time I looked at you, I saw her betrayal. It wasn't fair to you, you were innocent in all this, but I couldn't handle it. But I always paid the alimony. I couldn't be there for you, but I made sure you were taken care of financially." "What do you mean you paid alimony?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Mom always said you never sent a penny. She and Steve kept telling me I had to help with Tommy and pay rent because you weren't supporting me." Dad, or I guess not really my dad, reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were bank statements, years of them, showing monthly transfers to my mother's account. $2,000 every month, without fail, he said quietly. I set up automatic payments the day I left. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. Each statement showed the same thing, regular monthly payments, all clearly labeled child support, Sheila. Years of them. Tens of thousands of dollars that I'd never seen a cent of. I felt sick. All those years of being told I was a burden, of working at the cafe while trying to study, of paying rent to my own mother while she had been receiving money meant for me every single month. "Why are you here now?" I asked, pushing the statements away. "After all this time?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly looking even more frail. "I have some news, Sheila. 2 pieces, actually. First, I can't have children. Secondly, I'm dying, Sheila. Cancer. Doctors give me 2 years, at most." I sat there, stunned. This man who I'd spent years hating, who I'd blamed for everything wrong in my life, was sitting at my kitchen table telling me he was dying. "After I left, I threw myself into work," he continued. "Made some smart investments. I've done well for myself, very well. But I have no family, no children of my own. And despite everything, despite not being your biological father, I've never stopped thinking of you as my daughter." What are you saying? I want to make you my heir, Sheila. Everything I have, the house, the investment properties, my savings, I want it all to go to you. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what he was saying. This man, who I'd thought abandoned me, had been supporting me all along. And now he was dying and wanted to leave me his fortune? I need time to think about this, I managed to say. He nodded and stood up slowly. Of course, here's my card. Call me when you're ready to talk. I walked him to the door in a daze. Before he left, he turned to me one last time. For what it's worth, Sheila, I'm sorry. Not for leaving your mother, she made her choices. But I'm sorry for leaving you. I should have found a way to tell you the truth. I barely slept that night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove to Mom and Steve's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. Tommy was at school, and Steve's car wasn't in the driveway. Perfect. Mom answered the door in her gardening clothes, looking surprised to see me. Sheila, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, walking past her into the house. The living room looked exactly the same, Tommy's toys everywhere, his school photos dominating the walls. Dad came to see me yesterday. Mom froze halfway to the couch. What? Yeah, interesting conversation. He wants to make me his heir. Apparently, he's done pretty well for himself. He what? Mom's face turned red. After abandoning you? After refusing to pay a cent in child support? And you're just going to forgive him because he's got money now? I couldn't help it, I started laughing. A harsh, bitter laugh that made Mom take a step back. That's funny, Mom. Really funny. Because he showed me his bank statements. Every single month for 6 years, $2,000 in child support payments. Where did all that money go, Mom? Because it sure didn't go to me. The color drained from her face. Sheila, And that's not even the best part, I continued, pulling the bank statements from my bag. He also told me why he really left. About the DNA test. About your affair. Mom sank onto the couch, her hands shaking. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. You cheated on him, got pregnant with me, and then lied about it for years. Then when he found out and left, you lied some more. You took his money meant for me, and used it for yourself and your new family. I needed that money, Mom suddenly burst out. Do you know how hard it was being a single mother? And then when Tommy came along. Don't you dare try to justify this, I shouted. You made me work through high school. You made me pay rent. You watched me struggle to save for college while you had thousands of dollars of my money sitting in your account. Mom's shock transformed into anger. I raised you. I took care of you. And now you're going to side with him because he's dangling his money in front of you. Side with him? He might not be my biological father, but at least he was honest with me. Which is more than I can say for you. She stood up, her face hard. If you accept his money, we're done. Do you understand me? You'll no longer be welcome in this family. I looked around the room, at Tommy's toys, at the family photos that I wasn't in, at this house where I'd never felt at home. That's rich, Mom. Really rich. You made it clear years ago that I wasn't part of this family. The only difference now is that I finally understand why. I walked out of the house, letting the door slam behind me. Mom didn't try to stop me. I was at work when my phone started blowing up with notifications. Aunt Carol had texted, "Have you seen your mother's Facebook post?" I waited until my lunch break to look. There it was, a long paragraph about her ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her loving family for a deadbeat dad's money. Mom had really outdone herself with the drama, painting herself as the sacrificing single mother and me as the greedy, heartless child. The comments were even worse. I can't believe Sheila would do this to you. After everything you've done for her. She always was a difficult child. Money changes people. My relatives, people who hadn't bothered to contact me in years, were suddenly experts on my life. My hands shook as I started typing my response. Since Mom wants to air our family drama on Facebook, let's tell the whole story. Let's talk about how she cheated on Dad and lied about me being his daughter. Let's talk about the DNA test that made him leave. And while we're at it, let's talk about the $2,000 monthly child support payments he made for 6 years, money I never saw a cent of. I have the bank statements to prove it. Where did all that money go, Mom? I attached photos of the bank statements, making sure to blur out the account numbers, but leaving the payment amounts clear. The response was immediate. The same relatives who'd been condemning me minutes earlier were now flooding Mom's post with questions. Is this true? Sarah, what's going on? $2,000 a month for 6 years? That's $144,000. Mom deleted her post within hours. My phone kept ringing with calls from relatives, but I ignored them all. Instead, I pulled out Dad's business card and dialed his number. We met for dinner that weekend. It was awkward at first. 10 years is a long time, but somehow felt right. He told me stories about his business ventures, and I told him about my job. When I mentioned my dream of going to college, his eyes lit up. Let me help, he said. It's the least I can do after all these years. 2 weeks later, I was enrolled in evening management classes at the local university. For the first time, I felt like my life was moving forward instead of standing still. Dad and I started having weekly dinners. Sometimes we talked about the past, about what really happened. Other times we just talked about normal things, work, school, movies. He wasn't my biological father, but he was becoming something just as important, a real parent. Mom tried calling a few times after I exposed her lies, but I let it go to voicemail. Steve sent a text about tearing the family apart. I blocked his number. Tommy asked me at the grocery store why I didn't come to his games anymore. That one hurt, but I just wasn't ready to deal with any of them. Those 4 years with Dad were a gift I never expected to have. The doctors had given him 2 years at most, but he was always stubborn. I'm not going anywhere until I see you graduate, he'd say, and somehow he made it happen. We made the most of our time together. Between my evening classes and his treatments, we'd meet for dinner at least twice a week. He told me stories about his life, his business ventures, and even shared old photos from when I was little. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, watching old movies or sharing a pizza. You know, he said one evening, about a year after we reconnected, I spent 10 years regretting leaving you. Even after I found out you weren't biologically mine, I never stopped loving you as my daughter. I remember squeezing his hand, unable to speak through the tears. He came to all my college presentations, sat proudly in the front row even when he was too weak to stand for long. During his better days, he taught me about business, about investing, about all the things he'd learned building his fortune. The last few months were hard. The cancer had spread, and he spent more time in the hospital than out. I took time off work to be there with him, studying for my finals in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his bed. You don't have to stay, he'd say. Try and make me leave, I'd answer. He was there for my graduation, though he had to watch via video call from his hospital room. I brought my diploma to him right after the ceremony, still wearing my cap and gown. His smile was weak, but his eyes were bright with pride. I always knew you could do it, he whispered. 2 weeks later, he was gone. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him about my new job offer and how I was going to use everything he'd taught me. The inheritance was substantial, a beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 downtown apartments, and enough money to never work again if I chose not to. But more valuable than any of that were the lessons he'd taught me, the love he'd shown me, and the truth he'd given me. I moved into one of the apartments, rented out the other one and the house. The rental income more than covers my expenses, but I kept my job anyway. Dad taught me the value of building something for myself. Some of my relatives still try to play peacemaker, suggesting family reunions or holiday gatherings with Mom, Steve, and Tommy. I always decline politely. I've made my peace with the past. I tell them when we meet for holiday dinners, carefully scheduled when I know mom won't be there. But that doesn't mean I need to revisit it. They understand, or at least they've stopped arguing. Aunt Carol even apologized for believing mom's Facebook post without hearing my side. Uncle Jim admitted he'd had suspicions about the child support money for years, but never said anything. Sometimes I drive past my old house and see Tommy playing in the yard, taller now, looking more like Steve every day. Mom still lives there with her perfect little family, posting perfect family photos on Facebook. I don't feel angry anymore when I see them. I don't feel much of anything, really. Dad taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about love, truth, and choosing to be there for someone even when it's hard. He chose to be my father twice, first when he married mom, and again when he came back into my life. That means more to me than any biological connection ever could.